Hi there folks, Jim Grasser, 303 Barbecue. Best barbecue you're going to find. Today we're going to prep up some St. Louis style ribs. We're going to go from a spare rib to a St. Louis style rib. The difference basically, Frank, if you don't mind zooming in here, this is your traditional spare rib. We're going to cut it down to a nice pretty rectangle. That is a St. Louis style rib. On those ribs you're going to get what's called the rib tips. We're basically cutting those off. Those have a lot of cartilage in them. They're just not as tender as you'd like them to be typically. We're going to make this real easy. If you look at a rack of ribs, a rack of spare ribs, you're going to have a fatty chunk up here, and then typically speaking, there will be a bar of fat right along here. We're going to grab our knife, go right into there, and just simply swipe. And it's that easy. Flip the rack of ribs over, and we're going to come back the other way. On this side there are some heavier bones, so if you just take a gentle swipe, you will get through those bones. Occasionally there's a big bone in there, and occasionally you may have to actually chop down on it, but typically speaking, that's all you have to do. Now I'm going to work on cleaning up some of this extra stuff here. This just doesn't look very pretty. So, actually that doesn't look too bad. We're going to grab those last couple of bones right there and just trim that off. A good sharp knife is what you want. Now, in rib cooking, there's what they call a silver skin or a membrane. You'll hear a lot of people talk about, do you cook with the membrane on or with the membrane off? The membrane is this glossy thing here. Grab your typical meat skewer, come in right over the top of a bone, get underneath that membrane, and kind of pry up a little bit. You'll get it to peel up like so. Once you do that, set your skewer aside, kind of dig your fingers underneath it. Just like so. And you can typically get that whole thing to come off in a pretty easy swipe. What this is going to do, it's going to allow for a better penetration of your spice rub. And that membrane, to be honest, when it's done cooking, it starts to be like leather. It will not allow for a very tender bite. So we want to get rid of that. And of course, this one's just falling apart on me. You can always grab your skewer again. There it goes. Okay. The other thing is this layer of fat needs to come off. We will just gently remove it. You don't want to expose any of the bones. That will make what they call a shiner, and we don't want shiners. Shiners won't cook very evenly. Get rid of this excess fat here. Last but not least, trim the fat on the top side. Just gently come up underneath it like so. We're just going to get rid of some of this. Fat is typically good for flavoring, keeping the meat nice and tender, but I don't want all this fat. We want to make these ribs look pretty, be nice and tender, nice and juicy in your mouth, but you don't need all the fat that comes on them. I think if I cut that down much more, it's going to turn into a shiner, which I don't want. So, actually just exposed a little bit of the shiner. So, that aside, now let's talk about rubbing it down. Your 303 spice rub. I'm going to start from the bottom side. And we're going to be pretty liberal on this rack of ribs. This is going to put a good seasoning on the back side. And we're going to be more liberal on the other side. I want a good easy coat. The brown sugar based spice rub that 303 is, the brown sugar will caramelize, make for a nice, somewhat crispy bite on the outside, give you a good texture. It also offers the perfect amount of sweet, the perfect amount of heat, which is what barbecue should be. We're going to slow smoke these ribs at 180 degrees for 4 hours. At that 4 hours, we're going to wrap the ribs in aluminum foil. We're going to apply a little bit of squeezable butter, some barbecue sauce, and a dash of additional rub. We're going to crank the heat up to 225 degrees and let them go for an additional 2 hours. Every cooker is different, so your cooking times may vary, but if you use those as a start, you won't be upset. That is taking a cheap spare rib and turning it into a good St. Louis style rib. Please post your comments down below. If you guys have any questions on anything else to prep, let me know. We'll get it done. 303 Barbecue, good cook.